Hey man, in a world that's addicted to instant gratification, instant replies, instant validation, instant attention, there's a rare kind of power in being the man who takes his time, not because he's playing games, not because he's trying to manipulate, but because he's centered enough not to react on impulse. He chooses when to speak, he chooses when to reply, he chooses when to engage, and that delay, not forced but natural, changes everything, because now you're not signaling desperation, you're signaling value. And that's where the power of delayed responses begins. It's not about silence for effect, it's about silence that comes from emotional abundance. When you don't respond right away, it tells her something no words can. You're not glued to her validation. You're not sitting there, waiting for her energy to define your value. You're not tethered to your phone, chasing dopamine hits through her replies. You're living, you're moving, you're busy with things that matter to you. And that delay, it creates a psychological gap, one that starts to make her wonder, where is he? What's he doing? Why hasn't he replied yet? That gap becomes a loop in her mind, a loop that keeps pulling her toward you without you lifting a finger. Most men rush to reply. They jump at every notification. They believe that quick response equals high interest, equals high value. But what they don't realize is that speed often signals need, and need repels the feminine. Not because women want to be ignored, but because women are drawn to certainty. And the man who delays his response, not to punish, but because he's engaged in his own life, is telling her one thing: you're not the center of my world, you're welcome in it, but I don't orbit around you. And that positioning, it triggers her desire to lean in. There's something almost primal about the power of space. A short delay between her text and your reply builds tension. Emotional space creates curiosity. That curiosity builds attachment, because now she's investing thoughts into you. She's imagining scenarios, she's anticipating your response. And that anticipation is what makes her emotionally involved. You didn't flood her inbox. You didn't validate her immediately. You just left a pause. And in that pause, she inserted value, because the mind assigns weight to what it has to wait for. When you slow down your responses, you also elevate your words. Now, what you say isn't just noise. It's not rushed. It's not careless. It's measured. It's deliberate. And that weight, that emotional density, it changes the way your energy is felt. Suddenly, your replies carry a different kind of charge. She reads them more slowly. She rereads them more often. Why? Because you weren't rushed when you sent them. You weren't chasing reaction. You were dropping presence, and presence can only be felt when it's backed by stillness. The man who replies instantly becomes predictable, easy, available in a way that feels common, but the man who lets the moment breathe before responding, he becomes a mystery. And that mystery is not confusion, it's contrast. It's the space between words, the silence that says, I'm not reactive, I'm reflective. And when a woman feels that kind of emotional self-control, she doesn't get turned off, she gets tuned in. She starts watching you more closely, starts measuring her own words more carefully. Because now she's not just talking to a man, she's navigating a presence. Delayed responses also give you leverage, not as a weapon, but as a signal of your rhythm. Your time isn't up for grabs, your attention isn't free. She has to wait for it sometimes, and that waiting builds respect. She begins to realize, this man values himself. He's not needy. He's not trying to impress me. He's got his own tempo, and that tempo becomes attractive, because now she's syncing her energy to yours, not the other way around. That's what flips the dynamic. That's what puts you in control. Not of her, but of yourself. It's not about ghosting. It's not about playing hard to get. It's about creating psychological room for her desire to grow. You're giving her a chance to feel your absence, even if just for an hour, even if just for a moment. Because sometimes, the best way to deepen a connection isn't to say more. It's to say less, less often, and with more intention. That quiet distance makes your presence feel earned, and what's earned is valued. The power of delayed responses also protects your energy. You're not jumping from emotion to emotion, being pulled by every ping on your screen. You're choosing how you show up. You're moving from grounded space. And when you respond from that space, your energy comes across as stable, calm, and composed. Women feel that. They can sense when a man's reply is coming from a place of centeredness versus neediness. And the more grounded your tone, the more secure she feels in your presence. And here's the twist. The more she likes you, the more she feels the delay. The more she's invested, the more that pause becomes amplified. You're not doing anything extra. You're not performing. You're just taking your time. And that time becomes magnetic. It says, I'm not trying to be chased, but I'm not chasing you either. And in that middle space, that's where polarity lives. That's where she starts pursuing, not to catch you, but to feel more of what your stillness awakens in her. When you take your time before responding, you're doing something that triggers emotional contrast in her nervous system. She lives in a world of constant connection, people who respond instantly, who over-communicate, who are desperate to stay in her orbit. But you're not afraid to let the space stretch, and that space doesn't feel like rejection, it feels like wait. It makes her stop, makes her check the screen again, makes her wonder if she said something wrong, or if she said something right enough to matter. That self-reflection, that slight uncertainty, that's where the chase begins. Because now you're not just communicating, you're creating emotional terrain she has to walk through. What you're really doing, man, is shifting the entire dynamic from consumption to intention. Most people consume each other's time like fast food. They shoot off messages, emojis, voice notes, fast, thoughtless, and forgettable. But when you slow your rhythm and respond from silence, from awareness, from non-urgency, everything you say lands like a whisper in a loud room. It gets noticed, not because it's fancy, but because it took time to arrive. And when she knows she had to wait for it, even if it's just a little, she reads it with more attention. And in today's world, attention is the highest form of interest. There's also a deeper energy at play when you don't respond right away. You're signaling that you're not emotionally dependent on her, that her mood, her timing, her validation, they don't dictate how you move. You're not punishing her for not texting faster. You're just not prioritizing her above your path. And women may not admit it, but they respect the hell out of a man who doesn't drop everything for them. A man who checks his phone when he feels like it. A man who doesn't need to be seen constantly in order to feel secure. That kind of inner structure, it commands long-term attraction. And over time, she starts matching your rhythm. She starts spacing out her messages too. Not because she's playing games, but because you've reset the emotional tempo. You've shown her what it feels like to not be bombarded with instant replies. And now she's the one wondering what you're doing, who you're with, what you're thinking. Not because you bragged, not because you told her, but because you gave her space to wonder. And that wondering is what keeps her coming back. Not for attention, but for resolution she can't seem to find anywhere else. It also builds anticipation. You know how music hits harder when there's a pause before the drop? That's what your delayed replies do. They stretch time just enough that your presence becomes something she craves, not something she expects. That craving, it becomes desire. And that desire, it becomes respect. Because now you've shown her that your time isn't a free-for-all. It's earned, it's managed, it's yours. And when she feels that your energy is something she has to wait for, she'll treat it differently. She'll handle it more carefully. She'll work to protect it. And you know what's powerful? When you finally do respond, and it's short, simple, cool, calm, she feels it more. Because it doesn't feel like effort. It doesn't feel like a plea for attention. It feels like a gift, a moment of clarity from a man who doesn't need to explain himself. That clarity is addictive. She starts looking forward to your next message. Not because it's long, but because it's grounded. Because it makes her feel like she's speaking to someone who has options, has structure, and doesn't throw his energy around freely. And don't get it twisted, this works even more with women who are used to being chased. The prettier she is, the more attention she gets, the more messages she gets that say, "Good morning, beautiful," within minutes of her waking up. But when she texts you and doesn't hear back for an hour or two, when she checks her phone and sees you saw the message and still took your time, that's a mirror. A mirror showing her that you're not like the rest. And suddenly, she's thinking more, feeling more, investing more. Not because you pushed, but because you didn't. The subtle power of delayed responses also teaches her how to respect your time. If she flakes, disrespects your energy, or gives lukewarm interest, you don't argue, you don't beg, you don't chase, you just slow the flow. You don't ghost, you just disengage slightly. You stop feeding the fire and let her feel the cold. That cold isn't cruelty, it's clarity. It says, when your energy aligns, I'll meet you again, but I won't keep showing up when I'm not being met. That message, it lands without explanation. It rebalances the dynamic, and from that balance, real interest can grow again. Eventually, if she's truly invested, she'll start responding faster. She'll double text. She'll ask if everything's okay. She'll bring up how you're harder to read than other men. That's when you know the tension is working. Not because you played a game, but because you let her feel your emotional pace without sacrificing your presence. You didn't disappear. You didn't manipulate. You just stopped treating urgency like a requirement. And now, she's chasing clarity that only your silence knows how to hold. So remember this, man. Delayed responses aren't about power plays. They're about living on your terms. They're about honoring your time, your energy, your rhythm. They're about showing her and yourself that connection should feel earned, not extracted. And when you live in that quiet confidence, when you stop answering immediately and start answering intentionally, you stop becoming just another guy in her inbox and start becoming the one she waits to hear from.